My paper is completely dry, so I am ready for the next step. I'm gonna start off with the glazing, and I am going to paint different colors on top so that I can see what it creates when I've got one color overlapping another. I don't want my painting to smear or drip while I'm working on other parts, so I'm going to dry out my brush and use it like a straw to pick up all of the beads of paint that are left, so that I don't have any like puddles or dots of wet paint that are kind of loose. Now that I've got the beads of paint picked up, I can see how when I put one color of paint on top of another, it like those two colors overlapping can create a brand new color. And the other thing that's interesting is when I have the same color, but it's just overlapped a second time, I end up with a part where it's just a darker value. So that's another way to create value besides just adding water, right? If you paint multiple layers of the same color on top of each other, one right after the other, when they're dry, you'll end up with darker and darker values. I'm ready to move on and do the background of my value square. And in order to create the darkest value of blue, I'm gonna mix up some blue paint that has a lot of pigment. So I'm not adding very much water into it, just a little bit of water. And then I'm also gonna add the teeniest, tiniest, little tiny bit of black. And you wanna make sure that it is not very much, because black is a powerful color. And it's always easier to add a little bit more black than it is to take it away. So I'm mixing up the black paint first. That's way too much. So I'm gonna rinse out my brush. And then I'm just gonna grab a little bit right on the bottom of my brush, and I'm gonna mix that in. And adding that little bit of black is gonna make the value the darkest it can be. And then I'm gonna paint the background of my paper using that darker value. And I'm leaving this shape white so that I've got the lightest value, and then a light blue, a medium blue, and the darkest blue. When I'm painting a large space on my paper, I'm gonna have a bead of paint that I am pulling around to the white spaces. So to make it easier at the end where I don't have to soak up a bunch of extra paint, I can actually move that little bead of paint around so that it fills up white spaces. For my precise painting background, I want to actually mix up a couple of colors to get a more interesting color than what I can get just right out of the paint tray. So I've got some purple here. I'm gonna get enough so that I have plenty of paint to fill that whole background. And then instead of just doing purple, I'm gonna make an indigo color by adding some blue into the purple. So it's kind of like a blue violet. For the precise painting, you wanna have your brush as pointy as possible. So kind of creating a point with your fingers can help. And then using just a little bit of paint to start. So I'm gonna be painting around these small stars. And I want to work kind of quickly because I want my small brush strokes to blend in with the bigger brush strokes. I'm only doing one star at a time because if I went through and did all of the stars, the paint is going to dry and then you're going to see these weird blobs around each of the stars that don't ever really get completely mixed in to the background. So I've painted carefully around that star with the small brush, and now I'm going to use my big brush to go through and blend that part into the background. If you're careful, you can use a big brush for precision painting. You just have to get a sharp angle or a sharp point with the edge of that big brush, and you want to make sure and use just a little bit of paint. If you have a bunch of paint on your big brush, it's going to easily cover up those tiny details that you're trying to paint around. So I'm taking that small bead of paint and pulling it to cover as much of the paper as possible. And then I'm just going to keep working like this. I don't want any of my edges to dry because then it's going to be harder to blend it in. So I'll come back over here and work on this side before that edge dries out too much. Now that I'm done with my precision painting, I'm ready to try out 3 different types of wet on wet. So in order to do wet on wet painting, you are going to be painting wet water or paint on top of wet water or paint. So for this version of wet on wet, I have wet paint, and then I'm gonna take just clear water and drip the clear water into the wet paint, and that's going to give me an effect. The next one I'm going to try out is by painting with clear water first. I'm going to give myself a little bit of space in between these because they will all run together. So for this middle one, I'm just putting clear water right onto the paper, and then I'm going to drip paint into that clear water. And that'll give you a similar but also kind of different effect. And then the last type of wet on wet is when you mix one color into another. I'm gonna start off by painting one color, making it very puddly and wet. I'm also giving it some space in between the 2 colors on the side because I don't want it all to blend together. And then I can drip another color into it. And that'll give me a different kind of technique.